Welcome back. This next video, if you've done all the modifications to the center cush drive and to the bell housing, we'll show you how to reassemble it all. Moving on now to putting in the pilot bearing, or pilot bearing isn't probably the right word for it, but it's a support bearing for the front of that counter shaft. You'll see on the carrier, I don't know if you can see that actually, but there is a tiny little lead in there, slightly smaller diameter, which makes the thing self-gauging. So that if you can put that in, just give it a little push, that smaller diameter should go in, which means that the bore size is not too small, and we should now be able to pull the thing in and interference fit in the aluminium housing here, where it will stay safe and secure. You will need a selection of different length bolts used in succession to pull this in, and I advise halfway down, or at any point where you're not sure that you've been keeping it dead square, just go around and measure how much of it is still protruding beside each of those bolts, to be sure that it's going in nice and square. If you've got one that's standing slightly high, just advance that thread a little bit more, and to help you along the way, the pitch of the threads is 1¼ millimeters, so 1¼ millimeters is how much further it goes in for a whole turn of a bolt. Having now taken out the over length screws that we pulled it in with, put the right length screws in, a little bit of Loctite on them, final tightening. And we should then find that the face of that carrier is about 1 millimeter below the edge face of the center rotor. That's now ready to accept the extension shaft. So now we're just taking out the securing bolt and the washer, with a socket cap head screw inserted in there, just so that the end of the puller doesn't do any damage to the thread. Being careful here to get the puller underneath the webs of the rotor, not on this thin flange. And find that pulls off fairly easily. Voila. So out with the old, in with the new. You can see that the solid flange, the integral cast-in flange, has been removed and replaced with the removable flange from the other end. We don't need a flange on this front end because the bearing carrier, the support bearing carrier, provides that Now that's entered onto there, I'm going to take it and put it under the hydraulic press, press it all the way home. There we have the inner rotor of the centre coupling with the flange reversed, pressed in place on the shaft. Next thing I'm going to do is to put in the little extension stub shaft which runs in the support bearing in the other half of the centre coupling. I'm going to take that now to the hydraulic press and press it in. All of these bolts and fasteners which have been used before, which I'm replacing, I always give them a good wire brush up to get rid of any previous traces of Loctite, because new Loctite won't stick well to old Loctite, I'm sure. That goes straight in there, and as you will see, the little stub shaft has completely replaced the retaining washer. There we go. Replace the retaining washer, sorry, that was inside there before. That will now run in the bronze bush inside the other half of the centre coupling, and the mounting plate for that bronze bush provides the flange at the other end for the rubbers to sit in. There's an old rubber that's been used before. I'll just pop that in so that you can, it goes that way up. Pop that in so you can see exactly where they go. That sits in there and rocks backwards and forwards. There's the little tab for pulling it out. And I will try and do a video explaining how we change those later on. Okay, so now here's the bell housing on the milling machine, ready to cut the access hole in the bottom of it. Here we go. And there we are with the access hole finished, all ready to be deburred so that the bell housing will be fitted back on the engine. Oh, and they're out of interest, in this workshop I've also got the old Velocette, which is currently being rebuilt after a paint job. Okay, now there's some minor damage that you can see here and also here, which needs to be cleaned out before it's put back together. There we are, now we're all cleaned up. Can't feel any more burrs or untoward bits and pieces around there. Just give it a quick very quick brush out with the old faithful toothbrush. Something I should have mentioned earlier, that all the time you're handling this thing, do be aware of the fact that these dowels, although they're a fairly tight fit, can fall out. You don't want to lose them. So here we go then. All the mating faces on the bell housing and on the crankcase are all cleaned up, ready. Screws have all been cleaned up upon the old Loctite, new Loctite in place. Just lining this up for the first one is always a bit of a trial. I don't normally like to use Loctite into aluminium, but with these screws being so small, they're originally designed obviously to hold the primary chain case in place. This is a much heavier duty application than just holding on a primary chain case, so I like to give them every chance they can possibly get. So everything nicely cleaned up so all the mating faces sit down smoothly together, and a bit of Loctite on the screws. So there we are, finally tightened up. And I have, by the way, noted that these screws, as I say, are very small for the job that they do, but there is sufficient metal around the crankcase and the bell housing that should they fail at any stage, it would be quite possible to drill them out bigger, put a helicoil in and up those to maybe a 12 or even 14mm screw. And now we've put the countershaft, inner rotor and the back plate in position in the bell housing, but without any rubbers in the coupling. This gives us the opportunity just to check and make sure that everything spins nice and freely, nothing's jamming. Now we'll take it apart and put the rubbers in.